My hands were shaking so hard that the plate slipped and cracked against the sink. I froze, waiting for footsteps, waiting for someone to yell at me for breaking something in a house where everything cost more than my entire year of wages. Nothing came. Only silence, and my own breath catching in my throat. I pressed both palms flat against the cold counter and let the tears fall, because there was no one awake at 3 a.m. to see me fall apart in the cross kitchen. I had worked in this house for 4 months, long enough to know which floorboards creaked, which guards smiled at me, and which ones stared too long, and long enough to know that Damian Cross never came into the kitchen this late. He had people for that. He had people for everything. So when I heard the door open behind me, my whole body locked up like a deer caught in headlights. Maria. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room the way thunder fills the sky before you even see the lightning. I did not turn around. I wiped my face fast with the back of my wrist and reached for a towel to clean up the broken plate, my fingers still trembling. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll clean this up right away." I didn't ask about the plate. I heard him step closer, unhurried, the way a man walks when he has never once been afraid of anything in his life. I finally turned, and there he was, still dressed from whatever meeting had kept him up, his tie loosened, his dark eyes fixed on me in a way that made my stomach twist. Damian Cross did not look at people. He looked through them, calculated them, dismissed them. But right now he was looking directly at me, and it felt like standing too close to a fire. "It's nothing," I said. "I'm fine. I just had a long night." "You're lying to me in my own kitchen." His tone wasn't cruel. It was almost gentle, which frightened me more than anger would have. "I don't like being lied to, Maria, not even about small things." I swallowed hard and bent down to pick up the broken pieces of the plate, instead of answering him. My phone buzzed against my hip for the 3rd time that night, and I flinched at the sound. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Victor never gave up after just 2 calls. And Damian's eyes moved to my pocket, then back to my face. Something shifted behind his expression, something sharp and quiet, like a blade being drawn without a sound. "Someone is calling you," he said. "Late, repeatedly. And you're standing in my kitchen at 3 a.m. crying instead of sleeping." He crossed his arms and leaned against the counter, patient in a way that made it impossible to escape the conversation. "Who hurt her?" I blinked at him. "Excuse me?" "You," he said simply. "Who hurt you?" No one had asked me that question in years, not really. Not in a way that expected a true answer instead of a polite deflection. My chest tightened, and for one terrible second I thought I might cry again, right there in front of the most dangerous man I had ever met. "It's a personal matter, sir. It won't affect my work. I promise." "I didn't ask if it would affect your work." He tilted his head slightly, studying me the way I imagined he studied men across a negotiating table, searching for the one crack that would tell him everything he needed to know. "I asked who hurt you." My phone buzzed again. I silenced it without looking, my jaw tight, my eyes burning. "An old boyfriend," I finally admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "He thinks I still owe him something. Money, time. I don't even know anymore. He calls when he's been drinking. It's nothing I can't handle." "It sounds like something you've been handling alone for a long time." I laughed, but it came out broken instead of light. That's usually how it works when you don't have anyone else. Something in his face changed then, so briefly I almost missed it. A flicker of understanding, maybe even recognition, as if he knew exactly what it meant to carry a weight by yourself, because there was no one you trusted enough to hand it to. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just watched me finish sweeping up the broken plate, and when I stood, he was still there, closer than before, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "You don't have to hide it from me," he said, "whatever it is. With respect, sir, you're my employer. I clean your kitchen. I don't think it's my place to bring you my problems. I decide what's my place and what isn't, and right now, watching one of my staff cry alone at 3 a.m. because some man won't leave her alone, that's my place." His voice hardened slightly on the last part, and I felt a chill run down my spine, not from fear of him, but from the sudden, dangerous certainty that he meant every word. "Please don't do anything," I said quickly. "I mean that. He's not worth the trouble." I can handle him myself. Can you? The question hung in the air between us, simple but heavy. I thought about lying again, about telling him yes. Of course, I always handle everything myself, because that was the story I had been telling myself for 2 years. But something about the way he looked at me made lying feel impossible. Not really, I admitted quietly. But it's still not your problem. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I started to feel exposed, like he could see straight through the walls I had built around myself. Then he reached over, slowly, giving me every chance to step back if I wanted to, and took the towel from my hands, setting it aside on the counter. "Sit down," he said. "You look like you're about to fall over." "I have work in 4 hours." "You have work whenever I say you have work." "Sit down, Maria." I sat, more out of shock than obedience. He moved around the kitchen with an ease that surprised me, filling the kettle, pulling down 2 cups from the cabinet like he had done it 100 times before, though I had never once seen him make so much as a cup of coffee in 4 months of working here. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller with him in it, warmer somehow, despite the late hour and the cold tile under my feet. "You don't strike me as a man who makes tea for the staff," I said, trying to find my footing again, trying to remember how to breathe normally. "I'm not," he agreed. "I don't do this for anyone." "Then why me?" He set the cup in front of me before answering, his fingers brushing mine for just a second, and I felt that small touch everywhere, a spark I had no business feeling for a man like him. "Because you've been crying alone in my kitchen for weeks," he said. "I just never came down early enough to catch you at it before tonight." My stomach dropped. "You knew?" "The staff talk. Marcus mentioned it once. I didn't think much of it until I saw it myself." He sat across from me, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked less like the man everyone in this house feared, and more like someone simply tired, someone carrying his own weight the way I carried mine. "I don't like not knowing things that happen under my roof." "It's not your responsibility." "I decide what's my responsibility," he said again, quieter this time, "and I've decided this is." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold on to besides my own nerves. "Why does it matter to you? I'm just the maid." Something flashed in his eyes, fast and unmistakable, gone before I could name it for certain. "You're not just anything," he said, "and I'd like to know who's calling you at 3 in the morning and making you cry over broken dishes." I hesitated, turning the cup slowly between my palms. Outside, somewhere far off, a car passed on the street, its headlights briefly sweeping across the kitchen window before disappearing into the dark. "His name is Victor," I said finally. "We were together for almost 2 years. It ended badly. He thinks I owe him money I never actually borrowed, and when he's been drinking, he calls. Sometimes he shows up places. I moved twice to get away from him, and somehow he always finds me again." Damien's jaw tightened, just slightly, but enough that I noticed. "Has he ever come here?" "No, not yet. I've been careful." "Careful," he repeated, like the word tasted bitter in his mouth. "You shouldn't have to be careful in your own life, Maria. Most people don't get that luxury," I said quietly. "I stopped expecting it a long time ago." He didn't respond right away. He just watched me, his dark eyes unreadable but not cold. Not the way they were when he spoke to the men who worked for him downstairs. There was something almost soft in the way he looked at me now, something that didn't match the reputation that followed him through every room he entered. "You should have told me sooner," he said. "Told you what? That my ex won't stop calling me? That's not exactly a conversation you have with your boss. It is in this house." He leaned back slightly, his gaze steady on mine. "Nothing happens to the people who work for me without my knowledge, not anymore, not after tonight." A strange warmth spread through my chest, confusing and unfamiliar, tangled up with the fear I still carried from Victor's calls and the exhaustion of crying alone for weeks with no one to see it. I hadn't expected kindness from this house. I certainly hadn't expected it from him. "You don't need to get involved," I said, even as some small, quiet part of me hoped he would anyway. "I already am," he said simply. "The moment I walked into this kitchen and saw you crying, I got involved. That's not something I can undo now, even if I wanted to." I searched his face for a lie, for some hidden motive, Some reason a man like him would care about a maid's broken engagement gone wrong. I found nothing but quiet certainty, the same certainty I imagined he carried into every room where men twice his size feared him. "Finish your tea," he said, standing. "Then go to bed. You're not cleaning anything else tonight." "Sir, I still have." "Maria." My name in his mouth stopped me cold every time. "Go to bed. That's not a request." I nodded, too tired and too shaken to argue further. He walked toward the door, then paused, his hand resting against the frame, his back still turned to me. "Whatever he thinks you owe him," Damien said quietly, "you don't owe him anything anymore. Remember that." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hall, leaving me alone in the kitchen with a half-finished cup of tea and a feeling I couldn't quite name pressing against my chest. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel completely alone with my fear. And that terrified me almost as much as Victor's calls did, because men like Damien Cross didn't offer comfort without a price, and I had no idea yet what that price would turn out to be. I did not sleep after that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of my small room above the garage, replaying the way Damien Cross had looked at me, the way his voice had softened around my name, and I told myself it meant nothing. Men like him did not fall for maids. Men like him did not fall for anyone. I had heard the stories long before I ever took this job, whispered by the woman who trained me during my first week, about the rivals who crossed him and disappeared, about the empire he had built from nothing after his father was killed when Damien was barely 20 years old. I had told myself I would keep my head down, do my work, and never once let myself wonder what kind of man lived behind those cold, careful eyes. That plan had lasted exactly 4 months. I came to this house because I had run out of other options. My younger sister, Sophie, had been sick for almost a year, the kind of sick that ate through savings faster than any job could replace them. Our mother passed when Sophie was 12, and since then, it had only ever been the two of us, patching together a life out of whatever we could manage. When the agency called and told me about a position in the Cross household, paying more in a month than I used to make in 3, I didn't ask questions about the family's reputation. I just said yes. The other staff warned me quietly on my first day, "Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ask about the men who come and go at odd hours. Don't linger near his office when the door is closed." I followed every rule perfectly for weeks, moving through the halls like a shadow, keeping my eyes down, keeping my mouth shut. It worked, mostly, until the day I dropped a tray of glasses outside his study, and he opened the door himself, instead of sending someone else to see what the noise was. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't even seemed annoyed. He'd simply looked at the mess, looked at me kneeling on the floor trying to gather the broken pieces with hands that wouldn't stop shaking from nerves, and said, "Leave it. Someone else will handle that." Then he'd gone back inside and closed the door, and I remember standing there afterward, strangely unsettled by how ordinary the moment had felt, how human, when everything I'd heard about him painted a picture of someone incapable of anything but calculation. After that, I started noticing him in ways I hadn't allowed myself to before. The way he thanked the kitchen staff, quietly, almost like he didn't want anyone to hear it. The way he never raised his voice at the household help, even when things went wrong, saving whatever coldness he carried for the men who came through the side entrance for meetings that always ended with tension thick enough to choke on. The way his eyes would sometimes catch mine across a room and hold there for 1 second too long before he looked away first, not me. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself the same thing the morning after he made me tea in his kitchen, standing in front of my small bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection, like it might have some answer written across it. It was nothing. He felt sorry for me. That was all. But when I came downstairs that morning, later than usual, because I had barely managed 2 hours of sleep, I found Marcus waiting near the kitchen entrance, instead of at his usual post by the front gate. Marcus was Damien's right hand, a broad-shouldered man with a quiet, watchful way about him that made most of the staff nervous. He had always been polite to me, but distant, the way everyone tried to stay distant from anything too close to the center of that house. "Maria," he said, straightening as I approached. "Mr. Cross wants to see you before you start your shift." My stomach dropped. Did I do something wrong? No. Marcus's expression softened slightly, which was rare enough that it caught me off guard. He just wants to talk. His office. Whenever you're ready. I smoothed down my apron with hands that had gone cold, and made my way down the hall, past the portraits of cross ancestors I had dusted 100 times without ever really looking at, until I reached the heavy wooden door of his study. I knocked once, and his voice told me to come in. He was standing by the window when I entered, his back to me, a phone pressed to his ear. He held up one finger, asking me to wait, and finished his call in short, clipped sentences that told me nothing about what he was discussing, but everything about the kind of man he became when he thought no one who mattered was listening. His voice was flat, final, the kind of voice that ended arguments before they began. When he hung up, he turned to face me, and the coldness in his expression melted away almost instantly, replaced by something far more careful. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "Marcus said you wanted to talk to me. I had someone look into a few things last night." He walked around his desk and sat across from me instead of behind it, which felt deliberate, like he was trying to close the distance between employer and employee before the conversation even started. "About Victor." My whole body tensed. "Sir, I told you that's not something you need to." "Victor Lang," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken at all. 28 years old, 2 prior arrests, both dismissed, currently unemployed, living off money he borrows from friends he never pays back. He's called your phone 43 times in the last month alone. I stared at him, stunned into silence. "How do you know all of that?" "Because when someone under my roof is being harassed, I make it my business to know everything about the person responsible." His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something coiled tight and dangerous, like a rope pulled to its breaking point. "I don't like being surprised, Maria. I especially don't like being surprised by men who think they can frighten people who work for me. I never asked you to look into him." "I know." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "I did it anyway." I didn't know whether to feel grateful or terrified, both feelings tangled together in my chest, impossible to separate. "What exactly are you planning to do with that information?" "Nothing yet." He watched my face carefully as he spoke, gauging my reaction the way I imagined he gauged every business partner and rival across every table he had ever sat at. "I wanted to ask you something first, and I need you to answer honestly." "Okay." "Are you afraid of him?" The question landed harder than I expected. I thought about lying, the way I had lied so many times before, to Sophie, to my coworkers at previous jobs, to myself most of all, telling everyone I was fine, I could handle it. It wasn't as bad as it seemed. But something about the steady, patient way Damien waited for my answer made the lie feel impossible to hold on to. "Yes," I admitted quietly. "Sometimes, he shows up at places he shouldn't know about. He knew where I worked before I ever told anyone here. I don't know how he found this address, but he's mentioned it twice now, like he's warning me that he could come here whenever he wants." Something shifted in Damien's face. A stillness that felt heavier than anger, more controlled, more absolute. "He mentioned this address specifically?" "Yes." "When?" "2 nights ago. On the phone." I twisted my hands together in my lap. I didn't think he actually knew where it was. I thought he was just trying to scare me. "He does know," Damien said. "I had my people track the call. It came from 3 blocks away." The blood drained from my face. "He was here? Outside this house?" "He was close enough." Damien's voice had gone very quiet, very controlled, and somehow that quiet was more unsettling than if he had shouted. "That won't happen again." "Please," I said, my voice cracking despite my best effort to keep it steady. "Whatever you're thinking, please don't do anything that could get you in trouble. He's not worth it. He's just an angry man who can't accept that I left. That's all this is." Damien studied me for a long moment, and I watched something soften behind his eyes even as the rest of his expression stayed carved from stone. "You keep telling me not to worry about you," he said. "Why is that?" "Because I'm used to handling my own problems." That's not an answer. I looked away from him, toward the window, toward the manicured lawn stretching out beyond the glass. So different from the cramped apartment I shared with Sophie. So different from every version of safety I had ever known. Because no one has ever cared enough to ask before, I said finally, the words slipping out before I could stop them. And I don't know what to do with it when someone does. The room went very quiet. When I finally looked back at him, his expression had changed into something I hadn't seen from him before. Something almost vulnerable, quickly hidden, but not quickly enough that I missed it entirely. I know what that feels like, he said, better than you might think. You don't strike me as someone who's ever been left to fend for himself. A faint, humorless smile crossed his face. Everyone assumes that, because of who my father was, because of what I inherited. No one thinks about the years before that, when it was just me trying to survive in a world that would have swallowed me whole if I let it. He looked away for a moment, toward the same window I had been staring at. I understand what it's like to protect yourself, because no one else will. That doesn't mean you should have to keep doing it alone. I didn't know what to say to that. The distance between us, the one I had worked so hard to maintain for 4 months, suddenly felt thinner than it had any right to be. What are you going to do? I asked quietly. I'm going to make sure Victor Lang understands that this house, and everyone in it, is not something he gets to threaten. Damien's voice had returned to its usual calm, controlled tone, but there was steel underneath it now, unmistakable and absolute. That's all I'm going to tell you for now. That doesn't sound like nothing. It's not your concern how I handle it. It's only your concern that it gets handled. He stood, signaling the end of the conversation, though something in the way he looked at me told me this wasn't really over. Not for either of us. You should get back to your shift, and Maria. I paused at the door, looking back at him. If he calls again, tell me, immediately. Don't wait until you're crying alone in my kitchen at 3 in the morning to let me know something is wrong. I nodded, my throat too tight to answer properly, and left his study with my heart pounding, in a way that had nothing to do with fear of him, and everything to do with the terrifying, unfamiliar feeling of being protected by someone who had no reason to protect me at all. Later that afternoon, as I folded linens in the laundry room with Elena, one of the other maids who had become something close to a friend over the past few months, she nudged my shoulder and gave me a look I didn't like. You were in his study a long time, she said. It was nothing. Maria, she raised an eyebrow, the way she always did when she knew I was lying. Mr. Cross does not call staff into his study for nothing, and you've had a strange look on your face ever since you came out. I focused on folding a towel that didn't need any more folding. He found out about Victor. He wanted to talk about it. Elena's teasing expression fell away instantly, replaced by real concern. He's still calling you? He was outside the house 2 nights ago. Saying it out loud made it feel more real, more frightening, than it had felt as a private fear I carried alone. Mr. Cross had someone trace the call. He's protecting you, Elena said slowly, like she was working out a puzzle in real time. Maria, in the 4 years I've worked here, I have never once seen him get personally involved in a staff member's problems. Not once. He's just being responsible. It's his house. He doesn't like surprises. Elena gave me a look that made it clear she didn't believe a word of that explanation, but she let it go, and we finished the laundry in a silence that felt heavier than it should have. That night, lying in bed above the garage, I thought about the way Damien's jaw had tightened when I told him Victor had been close enough to the house to worry about, the quiet fury underneath his calm words, and I realized, with a fear that had nothing to do with Victor at all, that I was starting to care what happened to this man, far more than a maid should ever care about her employer. Victor came to the house 4 days later, and everything I thought I understood about my careful, ordinary life fell apart in the space of a single afternoon. I was in the garden, cutting flowers for the dining room table, when I heard a car pull up outside the front gate, its engine too loud, too aggressive for the quiet street. I recognized the sound before I even looked up. I had heard that same engine outside my old apartment more times than I wanted to remember. My hands went cold around the shears I was holding. I told myself it couldn't be him. The gate was guarded. No one got past the guards without an appointment or a name on Damien's list, and Victor's name would never be on that list. But when I straightened and looked toward the front of the property, I saw him standing at the iron gate, his hands wrapped around the bars, shouting something at the guard stationed there. "Maria!" His voice carried across the lawn, sharp and slurred, the way it always sounded when he'd been drinking since morning. "I know you're in there. Come talk to me." Every instinct in my body told me to run inside and hide, to disappear into the house until he gave up and left, the way I used to do when we were still together, and his temper turned unpredictable. But my feet stayed rooted to the grass, frozen, while the flowers I had cut slipped from my hand one by one. The guard at the gate, a broad man named Henry, who usually gave me a friendly nod when I passed, was standing firm, one hand raised to keep Victor from coming any closer, the other hovering near his hip, in a way that made my stomach drop with fear for what might happen next. Victor kept shouting, rattling the gate, his face red with a mix of anger and desperation I remembered too well. "Maria, please, I just want to talk. You can't just disappear and pretend I don't exist. You owe me." I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, before I heard the front door of the house open behind me. I turned, and Damien was already moving across the lawn toward the gate with a speed and purpose that made the air around him feel electric, dangerous, alive in a way I had never seen from him before. Marcus fell into step beside him, along with two other men I recognized from the security detail, their expressions hard and unreadable. "Damien, wait," I called after him, finally finding my voice, but he didn't slow down. He reached the gate and stood directly in front of Victor, close enough that the iron bars were the only thing separating them, and even from where I stood, I could feel the temperature of the moment change. Victor's shouting faltered the instant he got a good look at the man standing across from him, some instinct in him recognizing danger even through the fog of whatever he'd been drinking. "Who are you?" Victor demanded, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "I'm the man who owns this house," Damien said, his voice low and even, more frightening in its calm than any shout could have been. "And you're the man standing outside my gate, screaming at someone who works for me. This doesn't concern you. This is between me and Maria. Everything that happens at this gate concerns me." Damien's hands rested loosely at his sides, but there was nothing relaxed about the way he stood, every line of his body coiled and ready. "You've called her 43 times this month. You've followed her home. You've stood outside this house before, close enough that my people tracked your phone, and now you're here in daylight, shouting her name, like you have some right to demand her attention." Victor's eyes flicked toward me, then back to Damien, some calculation happening behind his glassy stare. "She owes me money. 2 years of my life I put into her, and she just left without paying back what I gave her." "What exactly did you give her?" Damien's voice remained level, but I could see Marcus shift slightly beside him, ready for whatever came next. "Rent, bills, things she couldn't afford on her own." Victor's grip tightened on the gate bars. "I'm not leaving until she talks to me." "You're leaving in the next 30 seconds, Damien said, "or you're leaving in an ambulance. Those are the only two options available to you right now." The threat landed heavy in the afternoon air, and for a moment, nobody moved. I watched Victor's face cycle through anger, disbelief, and finally something closer to fear as he seemed to truly register, for the first time, exactly whose property he was standing outside of. Whispers about the Cross family traveled through every corner of the city, and I could see the recognition dawning slowly across his features. "Cross," Victor said quietly, almost to himself. "You're the Cross guy." "I am." Victor's eyes darted to me again, and something in his expression shifted from anger to a kind of desperate confusion, like he was trying to piece together how someone like me had ended up connected to someone like Damien. "She's just a maid," he said, though his voice had lost most of its earlier bravado. "She's someone who works in my house," Damien said, "which means her safety is my responsibility, and you have made yourself a threat to that safety." "I never touched her," Victor said quickly. "I never laid a hand on her. Whatever she told you, I never." "I didn't say you touched her," Damien cut in, his voice dropping even lower, more dangerous for its quiet. "I said you threatened her. There's a difference, but not one that matters much to me right now." Victor took a step back from the gate, his hands raising slightly, some survival instinct finally overriding whatever anger and desperation had driven him here in the first place. "Look, I don't want trouble. I just want what she owes me." She doesn't owe you anything, Damien said. Not money. Not time. Not an explanation. And you are never going to come near this property, or near her, again. Do you understand me? Or what? The question hung in the air, and I watched Damien's expression stay perfectly, terrifyingly calm. You don't want to find out what comes after, or, he said simply. I've been very patient today, considering you're standing outside my home, threatening someone under my protection. That patience has a limit, and you're getting close to it. Something about the absolute certainty in Damien's voice finally broke through whatever alcohol and anger had been fueling Victor all afternoon. He released his grip on the gate and stepped back further, his eyes still darting between Damien and me, calculating some kind of retreat. This isn't over, he muttered, though the words sounded hollow, more habit than actual threat at this point. Yes, Damien said. It is. Leave now, and don't come back. If you call her again, if you come near her again, if I even hear that you've mentioned her name to anyone who might pass it along to me, you will regret it in ways I don't think you're prepared to imagine. Victor stared at him for one more long moment, then turned and walked back to his car, his shoulders slumped in a way that looked nothing like the man who had been shouting my name across the lawn just minutes before. We all stood in silence as his car pulled away, the engine noise fading down the street, until the afternoon returned to its usual quiet. Damien turned to me then, and whatever hardness had been in his face while dealing with Victor melted away instantly, replaced by something softer, more concerned. Are you all right? I realized I was shaking, my whole body trembling with adrenaline that had nowhere left to go now that the danger had passed. I'm fine, I managed, though my voice betrayed me completely. You're not fine. He crossed the distance between us in a few quick steps, his hands hovering near my shoulders, like he wanted to steady me but wasn't sure if I would welcome the touch. Come inside, sit down. I let him guide me back toward the house, my legs unsteady beneath me, my mind still replaying the sound of Victor's voice shouting my name across the lawn. Marcus and the other guards stayed near the gate, watching the street for a while longer, but Damien walked with me all the way to the kitchen, the same kitchen where this had all started less than a week ago. He sat me down at the small table near the window and knelt in front of me, his hands finally settling on my knees, warm and steady, in a way that helped ground me back into my own body. Maria, look at me. I lifted my eyes to his, and the concern I found there stole the breath from my lungs. He's not going to hurt you, Damien said. Not now, not ever. I promise you that. You don't know that. You don't know him the way I do. My voice cracked on the words, 2 years of fear finally breaking loose all at once. He's done things before. Small things, but they build up. He shows up when you least expect it. He finds ways to make you feel like you can never fully get away from him. He came here today, Damien said, to my house, and stood outside my gate. Do you understand what that means? It means he's more desperate than I thought. It means he made himself my problem. Damien's thumb moved gently along the side of my knee, an absent, comforting motion that felt more intimate than he probably realized. And I don't lose problems I've decided to solve. I studied his face, searching for some sign of the coldness I had always assumed lived underneath his careful exterior, some indication that his protection came with strings I hadn't yet discovered. I found nothing but quiet, steady resolve, and something else underneath it, something warmer, something that looked almost like fear, though I couldn't imagine what a man like Damien Cross had left in this world to be afraid of. Why does this matter so much to you? I asked quietly. I've only worked here 4 months. There are dozens of people on your staff. Why me? He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working, like he was choosing his words carefully, weighing them against some internal scale I couldn't see. Because the first time I saw you, he finally said, you were crying alone in my kitchen at 3 in the morning, trying to hide it from everyone, including yourself. And something about that broke through every wall I've spent years building around myself. My heart pounded against my ribs. Damien. I know what I am, he continued, cutting off whatever protest I had been about to make. I know what people say about this house, about my family, about the things I've done, and the things I'm capable of doing. I've never once tried to pretend otherwise to anyone who works for me. He paused, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "But I have never wanted to protect someone the way I wanted to protect you the moment I found you crying over a broken plate." The kitchen felt smaller around us, the space between his kneeling form and my chair collapsing until I could feel the warmth radiating off him, until his cologne, something dark and clean, filled the small distance between us. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded myself of every rule I had followed for 4 months, every careful boundary I had maintained to survive working in a house like this. Instead, I found myself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something I didn't fully understand and wasn't sure I wanted to resist. "This is dangerous," I whispered. "Whatever this is, you know that, right?" "I know," he said, his voice rough now, stripped of its usual careful control. "I've known it since the first night. I've spent the last 4 days trying to convince myself it was a mistake to care this much about someone in my house. I haven't succeeded." His hand moved from my knee to my cheek, gentle in a way that contradicted everything I had witnessed at that gate less than an hour ago, everything I had heard whispered about him for 4 months. I closed my eyes for just a moment, letting myself feel the warmth of his palm against my skin, letting myself believe, just for that single second, that safety and danger could exist in the same person, without one destroying the other. Maria. My name in his mouth had become something I craved without meaning to, a sound that settled the chaos in my chest every time he said it. "I need you to tell me if this is something you want too, because if it isn't, I'll step back right now, and we'll never speak of it again." I opened my eyes and found him watching me with a vulnerability I never expected to see from a man like him, his usual armor stripped away completely in this quiet kitchen, in this quiet moment after danger had passed, and left only the truth of what remained between us. "I don't know what I want," I admitted honestly. "I know that for the first time in 2 years, I don't feel like I'm carrying everything alone. And I know that terrifies me, almost as much as it means something I'm afraid to name." "Then we don't have to name it yet." His thumb traced a gentle line along my cheekbone. "We just have to decide if we're willing to find out together." Before I could answer, before I could decide whether courage or fear would win the battle happening inside my chest, the sound of the kitchen door opening pulled us both back into the present moment. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral, though I caught the flicker of surprise in his eyes at finding his boss kneeling in front of me, with his hand still resting against my face. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice measured, "we have a problem. Lang made a call after he left, to someone we've been watching for a different reason entirely." Damien's whole demeanor shifted instantly, the softness disappearing back beneath the controlled, dangerous calm I had first witnessed at the gate. He stood, straightening his jacket, though his eyes lingered on me for one more second before he turned fully toward Marcus. "What kind of problem?" he asked. "The kind that means this might not just be about a jealous ex anymore," Marcus said quietly, and something cold settled in my stomach at the grim certainty in his voice, the sense that whatever was coming next would test the fragile, dangerous thing that had just begun to bloom between Damien and me in the quiet safety of his kitchen. Marcus explained everything in the study 20 minutes later, while I sat in a chair near the corner, still shaken from the afternoon, listening to a conversation I probably had no business hearing. Victor, it turned out, had connections none of us knew about, a cousin who did small jobs for a rival family called the Ferraros, people who had been circling Damien's territory for months, looking for any crack in his defenses they could exploit. Victor's call after leaving the gate had gone straight to that cousin, and within an hour, someone from the Ferraro side had already reached out to test whether the story was true, whether Damien Cross had actually developed a weakness in the form of a maid he seemed unwilling to let anyone touch. "They're going to use her," Marcus said grimly, glancing my way with something close to sympathy. "If they think she means something to you, she becomes a target. Not because they care about her personally, but because it gives them something they've never had before: leverage." I felt the blood drain from my face. This is my fault. If I hadn't... "Stop," Damien said sharply, turning to face me with an intensity that silenced the rest of my sentence instantly. "None of this is your fault. Victor made himself a problem the day he decided harassing you was acceptable. The Ferraros are opportunists who would have found some other excuse eventually if this one hadn't presented itself. That doesn't change the fact that I'm now a target because of who I work for, I said, my voice rising with fear I could no longer keep contained. What happens to me if they decide I'm useful enough to grab? Nobody answered right away, and the silence told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they were taking that possibility. Marcus finally spoke, his voice careful. We increased security around her immediately. She doesn't leave the property without an escort, not for groceries, not to see her sister, nothing, until we understand exactly what the Ferraros are planning. The mention of Sophie sent a fresh wave of panic through me. My sister. If they're watching me, could they find her too? Could they use her against me the way they want to use me against Damien? Damien's jaw tightened, and I watched him process that possibility with the same cold precision he had used at the gate with Victor. Where does she live? Across town, a care facility, for her treatment. My hands had started shaking again, worse than before. Damien, please. If anything happens to her because of this, nothing is going to happen to her. He crossed the room and knelt in front of me again, the way he had in the kitchen, though this time, his expression carried an urgency that hadn't been there before. I'm sending people to her facility right now. Discreet security, nothing that will alarm her or the staff there, but enough to make sure no one gets near her. You would do that? For someone you've never even met? I would do that, because she matters to you, he said simply. Which means, whether either of us fully understands it yet, she matters to me too. Marcus cleared his throat gently, pulling us both back to the more immediate problem. Sir, there's something else. The message that came back from the Ferraro contact wasn't just testing the waters. It included a name, someone they want returned in exchange for guaranteeing Maria's safety. Whose name? Damien asked, though something in his voice told me he already suspected the answer. Anthony Ferraro's brother. The one you've had in custody since last month. The one connected to the shipment that went missing from the docks. Damien's expression turned to something I hadn't seen from him before, a controlled fury so absolute it seemed to still the air in the room. They want a trade. My prisoner for her safety. That appears to be the offer, yes. I looked between them, trying to understand the full weight of what was being discussed, aware that I had stumbled into something far larger and more dangerous than a simple ex-boyfriend's jealousy. What happens if you don't agree to the trade? Then they escalate, Marcus said quietly, which likely means an attempt to take you as leverage regardless, since they've already shown their hand. Panic rose in my chest, sharp and suffocating. Then you should give them what they want. Whoever this man is, whatever he's worth to you, it's not worth my life. Just give him back and make this go away. No, Damien said, his voice flat and absolute. Damien, please. No. He took both of my hands in his grip firm but gentle, grounding me even as fear threatened to swallow me whole. That man is responsible for the deaths of 3 people who worked for me. Releasing him isn't just about losing leverage against the Ferraros. It's about telling every enemy I have that threatening someone I care about is an effective strategy. I will not set that precedent. Not for him, not for anyone. Even if it means I'm in danger? I am not going to let you be in danger, he said, each word deliberate and certain. That's not a negotiation. That's a promise. I wanted to believe him completely, wanted to let his certainty replace the fear coiling through my chest, but 2 years with Victor had taught me that promises, even sincere ones, didn't always hold against the chaos of the world outside our control. You can't promise something like that. Not against people like this. Watch me, Damien said, and something in the quiet steel of his voice made me believe, at least for that moment, that he might actually be capable of keeping a promise that size. Over the next 3 days, the house transformed around me. Guards I had never seen before appeared at every entrance, their presence a constant, watchful reminder of the danger circling closer with each passing hour. I wasn't allowed to leave the property, and though Damien arranged video calls so I could see Sophie's face and know she remained safe, the separation ate at me, a persistent ache layered on top of the fear I already carried. Damien barely slept during those 3 days. I caught glimpses of him moving through the house at all hours, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and controlled as he coordinated with people whose names I never learned. working to unravel whatever plan the Ferraros were building. Despite the danger surrounding us, he found time each evening to sit with me, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about nothing important at all, small ordinary things that felt like tiny acts of rebellion against the fear trying to consume both our lives. On the third night, everything came to a head. I was in my room above the garage when Marcus knocked, his expression tighter than I had ever seen it. "Maria, you need to come with me now." My heart lurched immediately into panic. "What's happening?" "We've spotted a vehicle circling the property twice in the last hour. Mr. Cross wants you moved to the main house, into the safe room, until we confirm what we're dealing with." I followed him without argument, my legs unsteady beneath me as we crossed the dark lawn toward the main house, every shadow suddenly seeming to hold some hidden threat. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted into something taut and urgent, guards moving with quiet purpose through halls that usually felt so calm and controlled. Damien met us near the study, his expression carved from stone, though his eyes softened slightly the moment they landed on me. "Are you all right?" he asked, reaching for my hand without hesitation, a gesture that would have seemed impossible from him just a week ago. "I'm scared," I admitted honestly, no longer able to pretend otherwise. "Damien, what if this doesn't stop? What if they keep coming no matter what you do?" "They won't keep coming," he said, "because tonight, we're ending this." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. "What do you mean, ending this?" "I mean I'm done waiting for them to make the next move." His grip on my hand tightened slightly. "I have information about where their operation is coordinating from tonight. I'm not going to sit in this house and wait for them to find a way past my security. I'm going to make sure they understand, permanently, that you are not a target they will ever be able to reach." Fear for him replaced the fear I had been carrying for myself. That's dangerous. You could be hurt. You could be... "I've survived worse," he said gently, though the shadow that crossed his face told me the danger was real, undeniable, something he wasn't dismissing, even as he tried to reassure me. "But I need you safe here while I handle it. Marcus will stay with you. No one gets near this house tonight, I promise you that." "I don't want you to go." The words came out before I could stop them, raw and honest in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in longer than I could remember. "Damien, please, there has to be another way." He cupped my face in both hands, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that stole the breath from my lungs. "4 days ago, I found you crying alone because you thought you had to carry every burden in your life by yourself. I am not going to let that happen again, not when it's within my power to stop it. This is the only way I know how to make sure you never have to be afraid again. I'm afraid right now," I whispered, "of losing you." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability so raw it nearly broke my heart to witness it. "I have never had anyone worry about losing me before," he admitted quietly. "Not once in my entire life. Do you understand what that means to me?" Tears filled my eyes, equal parts fear, and something far more tender that I could no longer deny existed between us. "Then come back to me. Promise me you'll come back." "I promise," he said, and before I could respond, he closed the distance between us, his lips finding mine in a kiss that carried every unspoken fear and hope neither of us had dared to name until this exact, desperate moment. It was gentle despite the urgency of the night surrounding us, careful in a way that told me everything about the man beneath the reputation, the man who had chosen, against every instinct of self-preservation, to fight for someone the world would have told him was beneath his notice. When he finally pulled away, his forehead rested against mine, both of us breathing unsteadily in the charged silence of the hallway. "Stay safe," he murmured. "Stay here. Trust Marcus. And trust that I will come back to you, because there is nothing in this world that could stop me from doing exactly that." Then he was gone, moving with Marcus and a handful of his most trusted men into the dark night, leaving me standing alone in the hallway of a house that had somehow, over the course of one impossible week, become the closest thing to a real home I had known in years, praying with everything I had that the man who now held my heart would keep the promise he had just made me and return to me whole. The hours after Damien left were the longest of my life. I sat in the study with Marcus, who kept his phone close, and his expression carefully neutral, though I could see the tension in the set of his shoulders every time it buzzed with an update. Elena came to sit with me around midnight, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders and holding my hand without saying much of anything, simply present in a way that kept me from unraveling completely. "He's done this before," Elena said quietly, somewhere around 1 in the morning, when the silence had stretched too long and my nerves had frayed nearly to breaking. "Handled things himself instead of sending others. He always comes back. This feels different," I whispered. "This time it's because of me. Maria," she squeezed my hand gently. "In 4 years, I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Whatever is happening tonight, he's not doing it out of obligation. He's doing it because he loves you, even if neither of you has said those words out loud yet." Her certainty didn't erase my fear, but it gave me something to hold on to through the endless waiting, through every minute that ticked by without word from the men who had disappeared into the darkness hours before. When Marcus's phone finally rang, close to 3 in the morning, the exact hour when this entire impossible story had first begun in a quiet kitchen, I nearly jumped out of my chair. Marcus answered, listened for a long moment, his expression giving nothing away, and then he looked at me, and something in his eyes finally softened into relief. "It's done," he said. "He's on his way back. He's asking for you." I don't remember running through the house, only that somehow I found myself at the front door, as headlights swept across the driveway, as the car came to a stop and Damien stepped out, his jacket torn at one shoulder, a shallow cut above his eyebrow, but alive, whole, standing under the porch light, like every prayer I had whispered into the dark had actually been heard. I crossed the distance between us without thinking, without caring who might be watching, and threw my arms around him, my whole body shaking with the release of hours of terror, finally breaking apart into relief. His arms came around me instantly, holding me against him with a strength that told me exactly how much this moment meant to him too. "You're hurt," I said, pulling back just enough to look at the cut above his eye. "It's nothing. Ferraro's people won't be bothering you again. Not him. Not his brother's associates. Not anyone connected to that operation." He brushed a strand of hair back from my face, his eyes tracing every inch of me like he needed to confirm I was truly safe, truly here in front of him. "It's over, Maria. All of it. You're safe now." "And Victor?" "He's been made aware, very clearly, that he no longer exists, as far as your life is concerned. I don't think you'll be hearing from him again." Something dark flickered behind his eyes, quickly smoothed away. I made sure of that personally. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. I simply held on to him, breathing in the mixture of cold night air and the same dark cologne that had become so familiar to me over the past week, letting the reality of his safety wash over every fear I had carried through that long, sleepless night. "You kept your promise," I whispered against his chest. "I told you I would." He pressed a kiss to the top of my head, his hand smoothing gently down my back. "Come inside. Let's get you warm. Let's get us both somewhere quiet." The next few days passed in a strange, gentle quiet after the storm that had nearly consumed us. The extra security remained for a while longer, out of caution, but the constant tension that had gripped the house began to ease, replaced by something softer, something that felt, for the first time since I had taken this job, like actual peace. Sophie's video calls grew lighter, filled with her usual teasing questions about the handsome employer I had mentioned entirely too many times without meaning to, and I found myself laughing more freely than I had in years. Damien and I fell into an easy rhythm neither of us had planned, but both of us welcomed without hesitation. He no longer pretended distance was necessary between us, no longer maintained the careful boundary of employer and staff that had defined our first 4 months together. I still worked in the house, still moved through the halls with the same quiet efficiency I always had, but everything underneath that surface had changed completely. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after that terrifying night, I found him in the kitchen again, standing in almost the exact spot where he had once caught me crying over a broken plate. This time, though, he was smiling, a soft, genuine expression I had come to treasure more than I ever expected to treasure anything. "What are you doing in here?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Waiting for you," he said simply. I remembered something about this kitchen, about a woman I found crying here one night, trying to convince me that her problems weren't worth my attention. "I remember that woman," I said softly, crossing the room toward him. "She was wrong, wasn't she?" "Completely wrong." He reached for my hands, pulling me close, his eyes warm and steady, in a way that no longer held any trace of the coldness the rest of the world associated with his name. I've thought about that night every day since, about how close I came to never knowing you, if I hadn't happened to walk in at exactly the right moment. "I think about it too," I admitted, "about how terrified I was that first night, and how different everything feels now." "Maria," he said my name, the way he always did, low and certain, like it was the most important word he knew. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I mean every word of it." My heart began to race, though this time, with anticipation rather than fear. "Okay? I love you," he said, simply and completely, no hesitation in his voice at all. "I have loved you since long before I was brave enough to admit it, maybe since that very first night when I found you crying and realized I couldn't walk away without knowing you were all right. I don't say things like this lightly. I've never said them to anyone before, but I'm not willing to spend one more day without you knowing exactly how I feel." Tears filled my eyes, though this time they carried nothing but overwhelming joy. "I love you too," I whispered. "I think I have for a while now." I was just too afraid to admit it, afraid of what it would mean to love someone whose world is so different from anything I've ever known. "My world will always try to touch the people I love," he said honestly, no attempt to hide the truth of who he was, or what that truth might cost us both. "I can't promise you a life without any danger at all, but I can promise you that I will spend every single day making sure you're protected, cherished, and never, ever alone with your fear again." "That's all I've ever wanted," I said, my voice breaking with the weight of finally saying it out loud. "Someone who wouldn't let me carry everything by myself." He pulled me into his arms then, holding me the way he had that first terrified night outside the house, except now the embrace carried none of the desperate urgency of danger, only the quiet, steady comfort of two people who had found their way to each other, despite every reason the world might have given them not to. "Stay with me," he murmured against my hair. "Not as staff, not as someone who works in this house. Stay with me, because this is where you belong, because I want to build a life with you that has nothing to do with what either of us survived to get here." "Yes," I said, without a single moment of hesitation. "Yes, Damien, I'll stay." Outside, the evening settled into a gentle darkness over the estate, the same darkness that had once felt so threatening, so full of danger, waiting to reach into every corner of my carefully guarded life. Now it simply felt peaceful, the quiet hum of a home finally settled into itself, finally safe. Elena passed by the kitchen doorway sometime later, catching sight of the two of us standing together, wrapped in each other, and she smiled before continuing on her way, leaving us to the private, hard-won happiness we had both fought so desperately to find. Months later, I would still remember that first night vividly. The broken plate, the tears I tried so hard to hide, the quiet, dangerous man who had walked into his own kitchen and refused to look away from my pain. I would remember every moment of fear that followed, every threat that tried to tear apart the fragile thing growing between us, and I would understand, with complete certainty, that sometimes the most unexpected people become the ones who save us from ourselves. The kitchen that had once witnessed my loneliest moments became, instead, the heart of a home I never expected to find, filled now with quiet mornings and shared meals and a love neither of us had believed we deserved until we found it in each other. Damien Cross, the man the world feared and misunderstood in equal measure, had asked me one simple question on the worst night of my life, a question that changed everything that came after. Who hurt her? He had asked it not out of obligation, not out of curiosity, but out of something deeper, something that had been waiting quietly inside him for someone worth protecting completely. And in answering that question, in letting him see the truth of my pain, instead of hiding it the way I always had, I had found not just safety, but a home, a family, and a love strong enough to survive everything the world tried to throw against it. We stayed in that kitchen a long while that evening, neither of us in any hurry to move, both of us simply grateful to have found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, in the quiet space between danger and safety, between loneliness and belonging, exactly where two broken people had somehow managed to build something whole.